So I'd like to introduce Bradley Henning. Bradley Henning is a 30-year-old male from Aurora, Ontario, Canada. He works in education with special education students, and he is currently attending Toronto Metropolitan University working on completing his bachelor's degree of disability studies and plans pursue a bachelor's of education degree to become a special education teacher. Bradley enjoys traveling, weekends at the cottage with his close friends, and trying new restaurants. And I'm very pleased that Bradley said yes to presenting, because I really feel that his journey with being diagnosed with gigantism is truly something that needs to be shared and recognized. So Bradley said yes.
All right. Good morning. My name's Bradley Henning, and today I'm going to share my gigantism acromegaly story through my diagnosis and surgeries and pre-diagnosis and to now living life as an adult with acromegaly. So I think that we can all agree this disease is challenging. Getting our family doctors to understand the fact that there are true medical issues when some of the symptoms are all too common, while others seem more outlandish. Especially while being a young teenager going through puberty, body aches, growth spurts, and physical changes are normal. However, severe headaches that can bring tears to your eyes and balance issues so bad that the wind can literally knock you over are not. So this is my pre-diagnosis. Sorry? Oh yeah, no, yeah,
Okay.
perfect. So where do I start? When I was 14 or 15, I was your pretty average teenager. I'd like to hang out with my friends, complained about homework, begged my parents to let me skip school, fake a sick day once in a while. But the problem started when my growth spurt started, and I was becoming significantly taller than my peers. In grade 8, I was the tallest person in my grade and in my school. And as I graduated and moved into high school, this is kind of where the journey begins. So aside from being abnormally tall and growing at a rapid rate, I was having issues with my body. I was suffering from excruciating headaches, and that would leave me debilitated to the point of missing school, family functions, and just the overall enjoyment of being a young teenager. I was also dealing with the fact that I struggled to maintain any form of balance, whether it be walking, running, or standing. This is where the concern from my family came into play. So it was the summer going from grade 9 into grade 10 when my health issues really took a turn. My balance continued to get worse and worse, which prompted my mom to bring me to see a quadrupist to see if we could find some answers as to why I was so stumbly and unbalanced. I remember the appointment and how odd it felt walking into that doctor's office for him to just stare at my feet. After he poked and prodded, he asked me to walk up and down a hallway with a few hems and haws. As we sat back down in the office, his results were inconclusive, and he suggested that we seek further medical help from my family doctor with the suggestion of being referred to see a neurologist. His reasoning behind this was that he thought maybe the brain was not sending proper signals to the nerves in my legs and feet. And he also noted that I had extraordinarily high arches and wide feet. That could be playing a small role. So from there, we went home feeling nervous, uneasy, and feeling impatient to get some answers. So after hearing his suggestion, my mom contacted my family physician, who brought us in to hear our case and to try to understand why seeing a neurologist was necessary. After a lengthy appointment with my mom expressing her concerns of the balance issues along with the excruciating headaches I was suffering through, my doctor agreed that something wasn't right. And with that in mind, he referred us to our first of many appointments. So my diagnosis. It was only a couple of weeks before we received the referral to meet the first neurologist. Unfortunately, I don't remember his name, as I was seen under the care of many physicians during my journey. In the appointment, we discussed our concerns with my balance and headaches. The doctor suggested that I go for some nerve testing. So with that in mind, he sent off a requisition to have a nerve conduction velocity test done on me. The appointment date came, and I remember the overwhelming feeling of being in that nerve test, covered in wires and sensors, and having electrical pulses throbbing through your body to see if your nerves are responding in the correct manner. And let me tell you, it's not the thing a teenager wants to skip school for. I'd take the pain of a boring history class over the pain of a nerve test any day. A few weeks passed, and we were rescheduled to see the neurologist. In the appointment, he gave us some good but not great news. He told us that the results were positive in the sense that there was no damage to my nerves, and that wasn't the reason for the balance issues. However, the not so great news was that he was still unsure of what was causing the problems at hand. It was at this point that he decided the next best option was to send me for an MRI to make sure my brain was in proper order. At this point, the summer had come and gone, and it was time for back to school. I entered grade 10 with the gloom and anxiety of health issues looming over me. One day in the first half of September, we received a notice that the MRI had been scheduled. On the day of the MRI, I felt terribly anxious and nervous. I went into the basement of St. Michael's Hospital in downtown Toronto to the radiation department. I switched into my hospital gown and anxiously waited for them to call my name. When the time came, I started to cry in fear. I begged the MRI technician to allow my mom into the room with me. After all, those machines are scary and intimidating for an adult, never mind a 15-year-old. After determining how they would make it work, they made the decision that she would be able to sit in the room with me at a distance while I underwent the MRI. The MRI finished up, and I gladly survived, my first of many to come. While I didn't know it at this time, later in the future, my mom would tell me that while she sat there in the MRI waiting room, waiting patiently for the loud test to conclude, that shortly after it began, the technician left the room, and a quick while later came back with a group of doctors who all very patiently stared and pointed and chatted at the screen. After the MRI happened, things transpired very quickly. The first neurologist received the results, and he immediately requested we see a neurosurgeon, as the issue at hand wasn't something he specialized in. He sent in an emergency request to the now retired Dr. Paul Mueller, a neurosurgeon at St. Michael's Hospital. Within literal hours of having this referral sent over, we were scheduled to see him the following couple of days. When we went down to meet Dr. Mueller, it was a whirlwind of information. He firstly explained in great detail how I had a fairly large-sized tumor on my pituitary gland, measuring 2 centimeters by 4 centimeters, and how this was an urgent situation that needed to be looked after. In the appointment, it was decided I would be treated at St. Michael's Hospital rather than the Hospital for Sick Children due to my age. It would be easier to keep my information in one place rather than referring me back and forth over the coming years. After this appointment, things continued to move at a rapid rate. A preoperative appointment was scheduled for the beginning of October. Blood work was needed to find out my hormone levels and to see what my tumor was impacting. We were also advised we should go schedule an appointment the same day as my pre-op to give a large deposit of blood in the case that something happens to me in surgery. It was all too much for my young self to understand. I remember it like it was throwing myself to the wind and just going from one thing to the next, not retaining a whole lot of information. My first surgery was scheduled for a short while later, October 10th, 2007. The morning of the surgery, Myself and both my parents woke up early. We had to be down at the hospital for 7 a.m. The worries that fluttered in my head made me more nervous, anxious, and scared by the second. It was all happening so fast. We drove down to the hospital in near silence. The tension in the car could have been cut with a knife. My parents worried about their youngest child and what could happen, while I worried about all the things I'm sure that you guys have worried about preparing for this surgery. We arrived at the hospital and we went up to the surgery department. We arrived in the waiting room and checked in, and a short while later, I was prepped for my first transsphenoidal surgery. Thinking back, I can still feel how terrified I was walking into that freezing cold, sterile room. The nurses and doctors prepping and trying to talk to me about what was going to happen. They reassured me that things would work out. This was what they practiced and studied years for. The surgery lasted around 6 hours. My parents were notified that the surgery was complete and that it went well. However, the surgeon told them that the tumor was not fully resected as it became too bloody and hard to see. He was worried that he would hit the carotid artery. My mom was brought up to the ICU to see me, as I was so young. In the ICU, I was groggy, grumpy, and most importantly, thirsty. I begged and begged for them to bring me water. The nurses refused as it wasn't the protocol. I continued to beg and plead, and they decided it would be okay to give me a moist towel to cool my lips. But in typical Bradley fashion, it wasn't good enough. I was trying to suck the moisture out of the cloth. I was dying for a drink. Eventually, I made such a stink that the nurses brought me ice chips just to get me to keep quiet. I guess it's true. The squeaky wheel does get the grease. Once I left the ICU and was brought up to my room in the neurology department on the 9th floor, I was able to settle for the night. The stay was mostly uneventful, aside from the horrible unpacking of my nose. Dr. Mueller came down with a couple of nurses and told me that it was time to take the packing out of my nose as the bleeding should have stopped. This was the most painful part of surgery, in my opinion. As they started to take the packing out, I began to cry, scream, and squirm. Eventually, a couple more nurses were called into the room to help contain me to get it out. The issue was that the blood had dried and stuck the packing to the inside of my nose, and the amount of packing was unbelievable. It was feet upon feet. It took several minutes to be removed. I'd give it the overall rating of a 0 out of 10. Not something I would recommend to many people. The one good thing that came out of being in the hospital was the amazing nurse I met. Her name was April. She was kind, caring, and compassionate. She truly helped and made my process in the hospital more bearable. Her bedside manner was impeccable, and she was always able to make you smile even in the worst of times. During the final few days of my hospital visit, we met with my first endocrinologist, Dr. Jillian Booth. This is the first time we learned my true diagnosis, gigantism. Although we didn't know much about it, she explained how the pituitary gland excretes growth hormone into the body, allowing me to be so tall. She said that with the surgery, this should help plateau my symptoms. After some blood testing, she informed us that my levels were coming down from pre-surgery and were within the normal range. Following the surgery, we had a routine checkup with Dr. Booth. Things seemed to be going well. My headaches had dissipated. Further good news came. I no longer needed to wear glasses. I had worn them since I was 2.5, and the eye doctor's guess was that it was due to the pressure. So it was due to pressure release from having the tumor removed. In 2008, I had my follow-up MRI. The results showed that, as we already knew, residual tumor remained. In a following appointment with Dr. Booth in May, she decided that it would be a good idea to do more IGF-1 testing and more blood work to see what was going on. Upon receiving the results, she confirmed that levels began to increase after surgery. We told her that my mood was swinging a lot and I lacked energy. Dr. Booth decided that since there was more identifications of acromegaly, that I should go see Dr. Cusimano. This meant another summer of stressful appointments and not being able to be a normal teenager. I was thrilled. After more appointments with Dr. Cusimano and many more blood tests and glucose tests, he decided that our best plan of action was to do another surgery to remove as much of the remaining tumor as possible. The only difference this time, we needed to see an ear, nose, and throat specialist to ensure my nasal canals were still accessible and free from scar tissue, so that Dr. Cusimano would be able to do a transsphenoidal approach once again. We met with Dr. Jennifer Anderson, a wonderfully kind and bubbly personality who approved me for surgery. After the usual pre-op appointments and blood work, as with my first surgery, the day finally came, August 12th, 2008. The surgery went well and it lasted about 7 hours this time. My parents were notified that the surgery was complete. However, hours went by and there was still no word about where I was or what was going on. Thankfully, my brother had a friend who worked as a nurse in the hospital, so we contacted him to find out some information. It turns out that while they were trying to de-intubate me, my throat decided it would be a good time to close. Oddly enough, I briefly remember this while coming out of sedation. I remember the nurses calling my name over and over. Bradley, Bradley, are you awake? Bradley, if you're awake, we need you to wiggle your toes. While all of this was happening, I could feel what I thought was my nose bleeding into my mouth. However, it was the blood coming up my throat from them having to re-intubate me while my throat was closing. Turns out that this is something that's pretty unusual, but people who have fair or reddish hair can have this reaction when coming out of anesthesia. My brother's friend came out and found my family and explained to them what was happening and kindly played it off as it was nothing serious and something that happens sometimes in order to calm their nerves. Thankfully, I was able to be brought up to the ICU and everything was all right. The second hospital stay post-surgery was uneventful again, except for once again the event of the unpacking of my nose. Following me getting discharged from the hospital, IGF and blood work was reevaluated. Thankfully, this time it showed my numbers were all within normal range, minus some smaller things. The final diagnosis was gigantism, secondary adrenal insufficiency, and hypogonadism. Thankfully, the worst was in the past. So here's just, as Dr. Cusimano talked about, a bit of my facial changes. So we, in the pre-diagnosis 2006, to my post-first surgery in 2008, to my post-second surgery in 2019, and then to me graduating college in 2013. So living with acromegaly. As high school progressed, things seemed to be more normal. My health was, for the most part, in a good space, although it could have been better. After having surgeries and meeting with my endocrinologist, I was prescribed injections of testosterone as well as Cortef. However, being the stubborn teenager that I wasn't the best at taking my medication. I hated the way the Cortef made me feel. I hated that I had to take it every day. If I only knew the struggles I would deal with in the future with medications. In my final year of high school, we received a phone call from Dr. Cusimano's office. Thankfully, it wasn't what we had expected. However, it was very interesting. His office was calling to ask if they could share our contact information with another family who had a son around my age who had also just been diagnosed with gigantism. And interestingly enough, they only lived in the next town over. Sorry, I just lost where I was. The parents had some questions and were looking for some guidance. Without a doubt, my parents agreed and our information was shared. Ironically, this information was shared with none other than Patty Hall, who's in this room right now. My parents met with her and she explained a story similar but different to mine. Needless to say, what a fluke that someone with something as rare as gigantism was living in one town over. Looking back now and understanding how rare this disease is, It was a tool I wish it was a tool I would have utilized more. Maybe it would have helped me understand this disease at a younger age. All I can say in regards to meeting with Patty and her son Aaron is I'm happy to know that my story helped impact their life in a positive aspect. From this point, things were going in a fairly positive place. I was able to graduate high school and go off to college and gain some independence. My family and I made the decision that since things were in a good place, it was time to change endocrinologist to someone more local. With that said, a referral was made to meet with Dr. Lee in Newmarket. For the first year or so of being his patient, things were going relatively well. It wasn't until a couple of red flags occurred that made us think maybe this isn't the doctor for me. They occurred almost simultaneously. The first one was that in my regular blood work, he wasn't testing for the big one, the IGF one. And when he did finally start testing for that, he didn't recognize the numbers going up being a red flag. The second red flag was when his office called me and said that they needed to see me urgently. So, being young, not something you ever want to hear, I guess. We went into the appointment with him, and it just turned out that he was going on vacation and wanted to see me sooner. Yeah, so a little bit of panic so he could have a nice vacation. Yeah. So thankfully it was a sigh of relief, but that was when we made the decision that it was time to find a doctor more suitable again for treating my condition. My mom reached out to Patty to find out some information about who Aaron was seeing and what her thoughts were on this doctor. She then referred us to Dr. Shireen Izat, who she ranted and raved about. I believe the words she told my mom were, "He's the best." She explained how well versed he was with acromegaly and gigantism, and that was enough for us to reach out. My mom called the office and spoke with the receptionist. She stated that unfortunately he wasn't accepting any patients, but thank God for persistent parents. My mom wrote a 4-page email explaining my condition, my diagnosis, and how everything had transpired. And with that, Dr. Izak gave us a call and said, "You're coming in to see me." So once we met with him, our concerns were eased. We knew that we were in the right hands. It was in the late winter of 2013 when we were glad that we had a doctor that understood the numbers. After some routine testings and appointments, Dr. Izat informed us that my numbers were on the rise and it was time to take some action. We met with him and discussed my options. He discussed putting me on medication that would help control the tumor and what it was doing to my body. High growth hormone levels out of whack. He decided to put me on 10 milligrams of sandostatin biweekly. We decided to wait a couple more months to start the medication as I was almost finished college and would be moving home. May 2013 came and the first injection came. With the first injection, the first side effects also joined. It was the week before my graduation when we started the medication. I received the needle and was informed about that there can be some side effects that include gastrointestinal issues. Well, being the lucky person that I am, that's exactly what happened. I started to suffer from extreme gastro-related issues. When I started to experience what I call the worst parts of acromegaly. I tried waiting out the symptoms, but extreme switches from constipation to quite the opposite were taking its toll on my mental health and my life. I was getting to a place where I needed something to change. I brought my concerns up to Dr. Izat a couple of times. The first time he told me sometimes it takes a few injections for the symptoms to ease. After about a year of dealing with the struggles I was going through, he finally agreed that we should try something different. He suggested that we up my dosage to 20 milligrams of sandostatin every 3 weeks rather than the 10 milligrams I was on every 2. I was skeptical at first. It was still the same medication, but reluctantly I agreed. Thankfully, this helped significantly. I was able to feel more comfortable with this and the symptoms eased drastically. Life went back to a better way of living, although I still deal with some of these symptoms. Over the past 9 and 10 years, I've had a relatively stable health. One significant change came that I started having some thyroid issues. Hypothyroidism is the issue that we're currently dealing with. When we saw the numbers for my thyroid changing, Dr. Izat suggested that we add a medication that would help regulate my thyroid levels. On top of the medications I was already taking, he prescribed me Synthroid. In the past 2 years, my numbers slowly began to rise, although nothing significant. Although nothing significant, it was enough to raise some concern. Dr. Izat explained that what he wanted to do was to add another medication that would help support the sandostatin to keep things consistent. Basically, the two medications would work together to keep things in check. I happily agreed to try what he suggested, and so we added Acromegaly up to my lineup. Thankfully, over the past year and a bit, things seem to be working, and I'm feeling pretty good. My treatment plan is as follows: testosterone injections, Cortef, sandostatin, Acromegaly, and Synthroid. Although living with acromegaly and gigantism is hard, and I wish I wasn't picked to live this life, I am. I'm here. I'm living. Currently, I'm working as Currently, I'm working full-time with a school board as an educational assistant, a physically demanding job which takes a toll from time to time on my body. I'm currently in my second year of university, studying for my bachelor degree in disability studies, working towards heading to Teachers College to become a special education teacher. Helping students who don't have the power to help themselves is something that I hold close to my heart. And I feel this way because, in a sense, it's how I was when I was first diagnosed with gigantism. I wasn't able to understand what was happening and had to go lean on the support of my family to guide me and to do the right thing. So to that, I say thank you, Mom. Although so many bad or negative things have happened in my journey with gigantism and acro, I have some positive takeaways as well. Firstly, I have learned that no matter the struggle that is thrown at you, you are resilient. The light at the end of the tunnel may be far, but it's there. I've also made some fantastic connections. Firstly, with my nurses who provide my care for my sandostatin injections. They've become part of my family. They are caring and compassionate people who are always smiling and helpful. Secondly, being part of the acromegaly community. Being here, getting to share my story with all of you. And share with people who actually relate in some sense to things that I have gone through or are going through. It's something we should all be thankful for. And thirdly, I'm thankful for the connection that it has brought between my family and Patty, because I know how much they both needed each other when going through these hard times. I've lived with acromegaly since the age of 15, or gigantism, I should say. At the time of diagnosis, I really didn't understand the path of my future. At the time of diagnosis, didn't understand the path my future and impact that acromegaly would have upon my everyday life. With regards to the symptoms and side effects of medications, I have tried to maintain a normal and balanced lifestyle. I hope if you can take anything away from hearing my story today, it's that things may be challenging, but sometimes a mountain needs to be climbed in order to go from the bad to get to the good. Unfortunately, it's not always just a single mountain. Sometimes it's 50 of them, but with a positive attitude, and the good will come. So, thank you.